Okay. Hello, everyone. Happy starting of the week. Hopefully you had a great weekend. Let's continue discussing the Workload API integration and the Workload API, let's say, redesign that we were talking about. And I think in the agenda, we have couple of items, but please feel free to add more items, and I will paste the URL for the agenda here. But I think we might need to spend some time discussing the scope of the integration for 1.36 for various controllers, and if we have any open questions related to that. Matt, would you like to lead this conversation by joining the screen?
Yes, sure, totally. I believe you can share the document that we started writing, right? Have a together and go over it. So just give me a minute.
I can share if you don't have it.
If you would like, yes, present, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. Let me know if you can see it. Matt, would you like to share this doc or the alignment to doc?
Yeah, like the alignment, right? So let's go over the things that we already agreed on, right? So that we have this consensus for 136. So we started writing this doc together with Heba, and overall, I hope this to be the path to alignment for 136 plus. Obviously, this will require much more work, especially for 137 and next releases, where we still need to unify our vision. But I hope for 136 we are very close, right? The things that we discussed last Thursday during sig-scheduling, I think more or less everyone is agreeing that for 136, decoupling the pod group runtime object is pretty straightforward, and it actually aligns with like all the visions that we already considered. We see big value in that. Also, the change is like pretty straightforward, and Heba already sent a cap for that. It's in review, so yeah, we are making good progress here. The other change is also pretty simple, is the pod group template. Rename in the Workload API, and the plan is to do that. Actually, we'll need to open a cap probably this week, right? Because of the PRR deadlines, to at least start the cap and then have it approved someone next week. And like the things that we still need to align for the 136, we had this discussion about scheduling policy, but I just saw your comments. So Heba, you believe like we can proceed with the basic and gang, right? And if we see like a more concrete use cases, or we see more data about merging them together, then we can get back to discussion. Does it make sense? Or
it makes sense. I just have one suggestion. I don't know if this is possible or not, but to just adjust to the structure that we have right now, because it's a little bit confusing. So if we can have, instead of gang scheduling policy and basic scheduling policy, if we can just have scheduling policy, and we can have the type, and according to the type, we can have sub specs. But of course, we can go with two types for now, and if we find that we don't need them, we can talk about deprecating the basic. But I get your point about pluralism.
Yeah. So regarding the having the type and like the discriminator or whatever, that was already discussed. We were discussing it as part of alpha with team and like API approvers in general, and the consensus was that we don't do that. I mean, we can always revisit that discussion, but that was already discussed with API approvers. So I know that Maciek was also bringing that up, and like we went without that. I'm not an API expert. I'm happy to revisit it, but I'm not sure if it's like worth doing it after, given that it was already discussed.
Okay, I can revisit the discussion in the API, and I can comment if I still have anything open.
Perfect. And I think like everyone agrees that everyone wants to deliver beta in 136, right? Because until we really get this workload hour scheduling to beta, no one will really be able to run it, right? Customers or users don't really use alpha features. So it's really critical that we deliver like basic game scheduling and other things that we already have in the pipeline for beta, right? That's why I would like to really laser focus on like the minimal changes that we need to make to promote the API to beta. And obviously, like as we have shown in like other documents, this doesn't mean like it closes the path for like future evolution, even really complex one of this API, right? So like it's completely fine to have all these discussions, but I would say like this next week, let's focus on 136 and then 136, and then we can get back to like discussing other things where like more discussions needed, or like more alignment is needed. Okay, and I think the remaining thing for like 136 is figure out the strategy for controller integration, meaning which real world workloads like job, stateful set, etc. Will we provide support in 136, and also like what is the scope, right? We already discussed that it will be much easier if we just start with static, meaning like no support for scaling up, scaling down, and then like the subsequent releases we will make the min count mutable, and then we can also change the integration to support these like more complex cases, right? So Heba, you already like had a
Dominic has his hand raised, so Dominic.
Sorry. I'm not very familiar with.
Just a brief question. So we don't plan to rename the gang policy to something specific to either pod group or pod set. It's not in our plan.
No, not yet. Like maybe in the future. Right now we only have pod groups, so I think we are fine with what we have. And it was also discussed in I think part 2 of this like public AP proposal.
Yeah.
And I think there's like no strong reason to rename now.
Okay.
So using this rule of thumb, if we don't really have a strong reasons to do something now, let's leave it for the next releases. So yeah.
Sure.
Just perfect. Okay. Do we? Sorry, Matt. Like maybe like just one of the question. Do we want to remove basic completely from 136 then?
Or no, we don't.
Want to keep it?
We're not removing it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just one of the suggestions. Just keep it only gang, and let's see how it goes. But it's up to the debate. If we still don't know if basic will be used in the future, right?
Yeah.
Yes, like we will see, right? And I think for now, also like removing it now would be if we don't have a strong reason for that. That's maybe not something we want to do, because removing something is backward incompatible change, right? So that probably would mean another alpha. And again,
yeah, because we're going to beta, the problem is if we don't remove it right now, we cannot remove it forever. Like we have the only, we can remove it only right now if we want to remove
it. That's true to some extent, but I'm even not sure if we remove something, then whether we'll be able to go to beta, right? Like that's
okay.
We'll have
it's up to the debate. Like I just suggest.
I see I see reasons for keeping it as we have right now, right? Basically, that's we discussed with Heba. That's basically polymorphism versus parameterization, right? And you can always find a good argument for both sides, but I believe we are already somehow diverging in those two policies, right? We introduced like this desired count in the basic. We are actually in process of introducing, right? There's an open cap for that, and having this like one GAT object for everything means like you as the use cases diverge means like you need to have a really complex validation. Also, it's like not really readable, because as a reader of the API, you start seeing that this field only makes sense if the other field is not set, etc. Right? So I think for now we see reasons for keeping it as is. Probably we also see like the plan for evolution that will even add more policies, but we'll see, right? So I think I would just keep it as we have right now, and then if we have a strong data, strong reasons, we can like get back to the discussion. Obviously, we cannot remove something, but you can always like deprecate and maybe figure out. The cost will be higher, but if it's worth, then maybe, right? So
yeah, even the name would be confusing to name it a gang, but really not expected to behave as a gang. No clear pros and cons, so let's keep what we have.
Perfect. Like overall, we need to find a trade-off between moving forward, right, delivering something, getting to beta, and trying to find the perfect solutions, perfect naming, etc. Right. So I think that's what we have right now. It's a sound balance. Okay, so going back to integration strategy.
Sorry.
So have you had a
Kevin has his hand as well.
Sorry, okay.
Sorry, Matt.
No, that's my fault. Okay, Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I'm still a little. So the goal would be we're going to introduce the pod group standalone in alpha, but on controllers are going to have to reference both a pod group and a workload at some point. And ideally in alpha, they should be creating a pod group.
Mm-hmm.
But then the workload would be beta. It just feels like I'm almost like part of me, the issue is if we have the pod group as standalone, it feels like we probably are not in a place to really like job set can't really integrate with this yet.
That's exactly what I wanted to discuss, right? And I think also for anything that needs replicated pod groups, it also wouldn't be possible to do that without using pod group, which means probably we shouldn't consider such like controllers in 136, right? But like let's exactly discuss like what can we do. We definitely can do something simple like job stateful set. And let's discuss other and see like what are the blockers with the current state, right? With pod group being beta, being alpha, and like the API structure that we currently have.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking at like how to opt out, and I feel like we're going back more to like a more rough approach for gang scheduling where you create a workload and the user would create a workload and then link with the workload object, and that is already like supported right now.
Yes.
Like how to opt out is like we could do this without any like with all manual steps.
What do you mean by opt out here? Like opt out from what exactly?
I think we have it already here as one of the points that we wanted to discuss in this meeting. If we still have time.
Sorry, maybe I'm not. The screen is shared, so I don't know which ones we're talking about. Like
the screen is shared. I think you can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see your screen. This icon.
Yeah, exactly. So this is actually the like the next point that we are going to discuss if we still have time. So
okay.
Yeah, I think the plan is to see how to integrate with the job and hopefully the DRA, and then we will discuss the job set and the LWS if we can integrate it once we have the 1.36 out, and what is the scope for the integration, and then we will discuss the open questions we have, like the opt-out. Go ahead, Matt.
No, I want to say more as something what you said. So, Kevin, just to make sure, like I know we already have some like POCs, like the one you work on, where like the concept of pod group didn't exist, right? But I think we are not really changing anything in the workload object itself. So everything like for the simple cases, it should work, and they really don't need pod group at the moment, right? So it will be a bonus if they create from the beginning like the pod group and we have this runtime grouping. But I don't think it's necessary now, right? And like some things, like for example, job set, they actually require a pod group, for example, for identification of replicas, or at least they may require. And I would say in that case, if we need pod group, like to not introduce this alpha dependency, right, for something that like can get to data first, then actually I would say we don't need to support that now. Only probably next release when the pod group gets to 137, when the pod group object gets to beta. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, I mean, I'm not. Yeah, we can continue and discuss that one.
okay.
Sorry, I'm a little confused on what we are, like, what topic are we discussing right now? Are we talking about controller integration, or is there other steps that we want to talk about?
No, we should cover controller integration, because I believe that's like the biggest open thing that we need to agree and align. Like, what are we going to do in 136 for controller integration? That's the topic.
Yeah. So I think I put a comment somewhere that at least my vision for controllers would be that gang scheduling is something that most people don't like. The API pretty much should be, do I want my job gang scheduled or not? And eventually multi-node jobs should probably automatically be gang scheduled. But DRA and topology aware scheduling, I think, are going to need an API at the workload level to kind of, because I don't expect DRA or topology aware scheduling to be something that we can easily guess what users want. So I imagine like DRA will be like, we'll need an API to configure like how many claims, I don't know, how many claims correspond to a pod and replicas and everything. But for gang scheduling, I think part of why I was thinking we could go forward with beta is that like we could probably do all or nothing. Like it's not going to solve all the cases for leader worker set or even job set, but it will at least be a good step in the right direction. But the challenge does get into like we would have two different APIs for like, well, we would have whatever you want to do for DRA and then gang scheduling. And I don't exactly know how to reconcile both of those without probably including like a workload template at the true workload controller level, which is kind of making this hard to rationalize when to do this work, if that makes sense. Because like DRA resource claims are coming probably in the pod group. So that would be at least alpha, but then for gang scheduling, we could get away without having that. But then resource claims are probably something that's important for gang scheduling down the road if you're using DRA. So,
I believe the cap for DRA is open, right?
Yeah.
Actually considering like to use the pod group like for the runtime to actually have something to attach the resource claim.
Exactly. Yeah.
I haven't checked the. Okay, how about if you have like more like idea about?
So yeah, this is the initial plan. I had a discussion with John. He's waiting for like for us to decide where to add the resource claim template, but he's leaning as well with us to add it in pod group level at least, and then we can discuss if we need to add it, like in any other level. But we didn't get to a decision, and actually we hope to have this decision as well today. So we are not blocking the DRA. So yeah, hopefully we will have this decision soon.
Yeah, so we'll discuss it hopefully in the next few minutes. And like also Kevin mentioned, like topology. So there is a separate cap for that, right? Where we are proposing like topology or scheduling changes to actually workload API to express like it's like simple initially topology constraints, and I'm sure you're familiar with that, but if not, I encourage you to check. I can send you a link on Slack.
Just from an API perspective in this 3.4, should we add this, like those can be added as part of the other cap with an alpha, even if the pod group, if the workload goes beta and there's a pod group template in there, you can add fields to that are all controlled by a separate alpha gate. So I don't think we have to like tie those things together.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Because that for me, that's the idea of like we can promote something to beta as long as we are certain that we'll be able to evolve this API to support all the cases that we care about in backward compatible way.
I mean, I think Kevin's right in that you're going to have an awkwardness where your runtime pod group object is alpha and your template object is beta, and I don't understand how that things only running the betas work then, unless it's the hybrid mode Eric proposed at some point.
But cannot we have like the field in the workload API mark as alpha, like
the whole pod group template?
In the pod group template in the workload, yeah.
Yeah, the individual resource claim template, yes, that's no problem. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying that from my understanding of the proposal right now is that the workload API would pod group listed in the workload API would change to pod group template.
Yes.
That field would go to beta with the workload API, the pod group template field. But the pod group object that's instantiated based on that template is alpha. So I don't understand how, unless we're doing the hybrid model that Eric talked about, where we're tracking state in the template.
We don't have pod template at all anywhere in the workload yet.
But we will have, right, in beta, right? That's the plan.
Not the not the pod group, not the pod template. Sorry, maybe I misunderstood.
No, I'm not talking about pod template. I'm saying pod group template. You're changing it from pod group to pod group template. That pod group template, the point of a template is that it produces an object based on that template. The object, that field, the template field is beta, but the object it's producing is alpha. And so how is that going to be managed when only beta is enabled? And that's what I'm wondering.
So maybe the problem is with the understanding of, or like the expectation behind the word template, right? And maybe
I think that, sorry, Mateusz, before you, I think that the trick is that the pod group effectively is something that we will not use in the feature itself yet. Like the goal is to have it like be able to expose the status, be able to attach the array resources to it, but it will not be, we don't need the pod group object itself for gang scheduling. So we can only rely purely on the workload object. And once the pod group advances to beta at some point, hopefully 137, then we will be able to report status, and so on. So it's
just really quick, that might clarify for me anyway. So the pod template in the workload controller, like in the job or job set or whatever, the pod template in 136, when you're only enabling the beta, would reference the pod group template name. But when you enable the alpha, it enables the pod group name. It references the pod group name, or do we have separate template and pod group fields in the pod spec?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the question that I have opened somewhere in the doc. I think we need to figure out how to link that. But yes, this is a valid concern. So like I have exactly the same thing, which we didn't yet figure out.
Yes, although I think there is no conflict here, right? Because as Wojtek said, the idea is like that. Like the pod group template name will go to beta and the pod group object to alpha, but it's completely optional for the controller integrators to create pod group object, right? It's completely fine if they don't create that. And I think that the confusion may be coming from that the name template suggests that the pod group template is only a template for pod group, right? We just use, like, for example, we have pod template, and that's how to create pod, and like that's the main purpose here, right? So maybe the name is not ideal, and we should consider changing it, because here
that is unless we're doing the hybrid thing that seems
policy.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm still
my pod group template would make sense even if we didn't introduce the pod group object, right? Because it's still defining the scheduling policy.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think the problem we're talking about, this is the current API. So we have this pod group that we will rename it to pod group template. Okay, this instance or this field refer to this struct. Okay, so we're proposing now to one of two things. Either having this promoted to a beta, and this is not what we wanted. We wanted to change this to be the pod group API runtime, which will be alpha. Okay, so this will be beta, okay, which is the pod group template, and this will be alpha. I think this is what they are talking about. Is that right?
Essentially, yeah. And then the reference in the pod template either refers to that template name, which is fine and would work because it works today. But then, how do you, when you do enable alpha, how do you upgrade? It feels like the data, we're changing the data cardinality relationship. like we're creating a separate runtime object, and the pods are associated with that instead of with the template. We're inserting an intermediary object.
Yeah.
And if it's just always one or the other, fine. But like people transition, especially once it's beta. So I'm just worried about how the heck we do that.
Okay, like I buy the point. So maybe reusing, like repurposing the field in the workload reference is not a good idea, because as you said, like transitioning might be tricky here. Or like looking at the whole controller, it might be clear like what you are trying to do, but like looking at the individual pods, it might get tricky, right? To understand like what is the.
But at the same time, that was my argument in the comment, is that we don't want to promote like fields in the pod API, which is pretty complicated API already, to GA if we know that they won't be used and useful eventually, right? So
the pod API, we don't like to mess with it. Eric, did you want to?
Eric, I think.
Yeah, I like the proposal for backwards compatibility better than the hybrid, like inline versus not inline proposal. So I like this better than hybrid. I think you can definitely make it work. One way to make it work is to add a optional field to alpha of called like wait for pod group, which defaults to false, and in beta you make it optional and default to true or something like that. I don't know. So when you use the alpha API, then the what you need is for the scheduler or anything that's waiting for pods and waiting for workloads to know if it should be waiting to expect a pod group or not. And so I think you could probably add a Boolean field that eventually never gets used, which tells the client whether to wait.
I see, or like which semantics we're using, right? Whether like pod group is pod group template or
and you can flip the defaults different between versions so that no one ever looks at it, and we can deprecate it and it goes away. So I definitely think you can make this work. I think there's some detail missing, but I'm confident it's possible to work, and I think it's cleaner than hybrid.
Yeah, especially if with that only like we can take that to beta and then deprecate that one field or something as we go to GA. That would be ideal, right?
To ask a question, I think I have hands up around the job controller integration. So if you're talking about this kind of approach, would it mean if you go to beta, who will create the pod group runtime object? Or we won't create them at all?
You mean right now, or once we go to beta?
In 1.36.
In 1.36. So it's optional. If the controller, the real workload controller, can do that, it will be nice, but like it doesn't have to.
I think my question is different. So we say something will be beta, something will be alpha. I guess we're gonna have two different feature flags, right? Is it correct?
Yeah.
So my question is like, when we enable only this beta feature flag, what will happen? Like, who will be responsible to create, or we won't create pod group object at all?
We won't create the pod groups, yes. The expectations that the workload controllers, like job set controller, whatever, like will be creating those pod groups on demand. And like if pod group API or feature itself is disabled, they will just not be created. Like we generally, like scheduler in general in 136 is not expected or will not be using pod groups object themselves. It will be it will be figuring out the mapping of pods into pod groups purely from the pod spec from the workload.
Okay, so we still go with the old approach in beta. The only change we do just on the API field, right? Which means like it's fully transparent from the controllers, right? I mean, it'll still be the same what we do in 135, right now, without pod group object, right?
Yes, to be precise, it will work if the alpha object, like the alpha feature, is enabled, the pod group runtime object. Then scheduler, if the object exists, it will update the status. Like for example,
I think my question is like when it is not enabled.
If it's not enabled, it will not do anything with pod group, and it will not. In both cases, it will not expect pod groups. to be present, right? That's
in particular, we will write the status to individual pods, not to the pod group.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about writing.
I think, yeah. Sorry, before Kevin, I just pass it to you. I think I also have another question, like in terms of the back to discussion on job integration. I think that you mentioned about workload template right before. My perspective, maybe we should introduce pod group policy API, and then gradually add more features to, DRA, gang scheduling, etc. Because I think it would be really tough for us to have a workload template on the spec directly, giving the API transitions. But yep, it's my perspective here.
Yeah, I guess I was just gonna say, like, the integration for gang scheduling will be alpha going forward, even though it will depend on beta APIs like workload and other things. It does, like, we don't have the feature yet, so it would be alpha start if we did this work in 1.36. But we could enable the workload APIs for beta and maybe focus the alpha working with the workload beta APIs would probably make sense, but I do think you are correct also that for DRA or TAS, we are going to have to think of something a little bit different. Whether it be like people just change the workload policy for now, or they change that one, but that is probably, I think, the biggest question I have from the job set perspective, because I do imagine a world where TAS and DRA will be important, and I don't think the same API we have for gang scheduling would really work, because like my goal would be to probably try and hide gang scheduling from the users, because I don't think we need to, like, it seems like we all kind of agree that gang scheduling can be min count equals parallelism or something and call it a day for gang scheduling. But for anything more than that, it gets a lot more complicated, especially if you have replicated gangs and other stuff. So anyway, sorry, rambling, but yeah, the job API is going to go alpha, so we can figure out some of this as part of alpha anyway, and probably wouldn't support it GA until workload is GA anyway.
Yeah, but I still believe we have a path going forward for like support of all these features like topology-aware scheduling or DRA, and like in this analysis in one of the docs, we kind of showed that
you have a path forward for getting this in the scheduler, but from a workload API perspective, I don't think we've really.
Okay, I see this part of the problem. Okay, so we should definitely.
Yeah, I think that we still didn't really discuss and I don't think we have any reasonable solution to ensure that we will not be like adding certain pieces into every single like workload API, true workload API. Like we need to figure out like a way how to encapsulate that and be able to, like, we still will need to somehow do the actual implementation in individual controllers and so on. Like individual controllers will be the ones who decide what features to use, at least to some extent. But like we can't, like, for every single feature we will be adding over the next releases, we can't like require gazillion different APIs to be changed to adopt these features, right?
Yeah, I guess I wonder if maybe the best option would be we consider something like a workload. Well, unfortunately now, like, it'd be like a workload template is kind of what was I thinking for job set, was that like kind of like how cron job composes the job template. Wondering, because like at the end of the day, like these APIs are going to change, and it probably makes sense that we eventually do consider some way of exposing that API at the workload level. But I think that's probably more when DRA and TAS get further along, in my opinion. For gang scheduling, I don't necessarily know if it's something we quite need yet. But yeah, anyway.
Okay, so like to summarize, we all agree that for the workload API, like the scheduling workload API, we are good with promoting to beta because we believe in stability of this API and ability to evolve in backward incompatible way to cover every case that we care about. But we still need to work, Kevin, on like the API on the controller side, right? To have some way of expressing everything and like not, I don't know, necessarily duplicating for every controller or something like that. But that's something that we can like tackle like next, right? Probably 137 plus, because even in 136, those integrations will be also in alpha, right? For if we enable like the job integration, for example, with Workload API. Correct? Or
yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I think I guess it's a question of, do we expose the full Workload API to all the users of true workloads, or do we try and like for gang scheduling, think of like, I want my job scheduled as a gang, like all or nothing, and then that's like, to me, like what we could probably get out earlier. But if we want to expose like the full Workload API, like let's say we know like DRA and TAS are going to be further, they're going to be not probably something we're going to be GAing when we're doing gang scheduling. So like, I'm just trying to think about how to kind of separate and protect users from like, design discussions in DRA or TAS versus all or nothing scheduling. And that's why I was thinking for gang scheduling, maybe a simpler API makes sense if we want to get gang scheduling in tree sooner. But there are some complications with DRA and TAS, and I don't know how to handle it right now. But that's kind of what Andre, I think, is saying in the comments. Like for job set, I guess it makes probably more sense that like we need a workload template kind of thing at the workload level, because we know we're going to have replicas. We're going to be able to want to control the scheduling policy much more granular than what we would probably do an in-tree job, for example. But yeah, I don't know. I guess like to me, the gang scheduling is definitely a lot more important to get out sooner. Like that's like what I would like to get. Like I know there's a lot of interest in my area, in my neck of the woods, on having in-tree gang scheduling. Not in DRA and TAS are probably not on my neck of the woods' radar yet, but I understand that it is for you all.
Okay, cool. So we definitely need to get back on that and think more. But
yeah, I think Matt, if you go to this document, which is the integration design, Kevin, Andrea, and myself, we added tons of like details around every workload, and like what is the obstacles and what is the blockers for the current workload API.
Yeah, I read this document. I was focusing on the Workload API side, and now I see there is like the other side here that we also need to look into. But I believe the reality is we want to be able to figure this out for 136, right? So I suggest we move forward with agreeing on what to do in 136, and then like let's get back to all the discussions and like solve all these problems.
So for now, in 1.36, we will have the same Workload API. Nothing will be changed except the renaming, and then the alpha will be like the alpha for group will be introduced. How can we integrate with like with whatever we have right now, right? This is the discussion.
Yes, correct.
Okay, let's start with the job API. Are we going to support Workload API for the job API or not? If yes, what is the features or the scope?
Yeah, I guess maybe we should back up for a second. I think I may have confused a lot of people. Maybe what's helpful is who is doing the job API work? Is that Heba? Are you planning on doing the KEP for that? Or
yeah, this was the plan. I already had a KEP last release, and I had to close it because there's a lot of discussion. As you can see, I already have a draft for this KEP, but I didn't want it to share until we like we know how we will end up with the Workload API and if we are going to implement it in this release or not. This is the plan, but I'm totally fine to collaborate with you on this, Kip.
Okay. I mean, yeah, probably best to get it open sooner rather than later, especially if we do want it in 1.36. If you have it open, feel free. Yeah, so that's good. All right, then I will, yeah, I can help you on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so how about the job now? Let's go back to the job. Are we going to support it or not? And if we are going to support it, we need some details. Like, are we going to implement the Workload API by default? What are the features, the scope of the feature that we are going to support?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Shall we, just a suggestion, introducing similar podgroup policy API to the job with a mean count, being able to start by the user, could be something we can consider.
I don't think we need it now, right? Because right
Yeah,
now,
we can have it this.
I would like to postpone that because I think that goes back to the discussion, if we have more features, how to avoid adding to every single API a gazillion different new fields to expose it. So I would like to postpone the decision about exposing this ability to users. Ideally, in the ideal world, I think we should try to find some certain condition where we will be effectively guessing based on job template if it's supposed to be gang scheduled or say the parallelism
I mean, we can start with, yes, I think we can start with that, right? If feature is enabled, and if parallelism, more than one, we just by default schedule it as a gang, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And have it just that and nothing else, basically. Just to prove that the feature itself, on the scheduler work, it can be used by the controller, and it's super simple still. And I would personally, jumping a little bit ahead, I would not touch any other controller for now, any other in-tree controller. I think it would be useful to have it.
I think
some other more complex cases like job set to try to adapt it, but I would start from purely in-tree. I would start with just a single use case of a job controller.
I think what I also want to say, so the job set probably will be the most complicated one because it allows users to have more flexibility, but something which we build on top, for example, API with train job. I think for us, it's also easy to understand because we know when user wants to enable API or don't want to enable API, and we do a lot of things on behalf of the user. So I think the problem with the job set, because it gives them more flexibility to users, how they want to configure their HPC or training jobs or inference jobs. Yeah, so go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, job set, to me, I think what I probably would, if we go with job set integration, we have to go with 1.35, which the API will be pretty slightly different. And then we would wait until 1.36 is out to start consuming those APIs. So I feel like for 1.36 timeframe, I don't know if we need to tackle that during the 1.36, basically the development work for Kubernetes at the moment. I think it will be kind of complicated. The one thing I will say for job set, for job, what we need to know is I think we do need the ability to opt out. Because if job set create the job, we don't want that job gang scheduling itself. We want job set probably orchestrating that. Unless we know of any elegant way that job set can disable the job gang scheduling without an API, I'm open to it. But I feel like we might need an API field in the job that allows gang scheduling or not, because there are cases where we may not want gang scheduling for job, especially if job set is creating a job.
Is there any problem? Yeah.
That should be explicitly enabled, right? Like whether workload integration is enabled or not, it should be like some explicit setting when the job object is created. Like we need to figure out how, whether there will be some annotation, but like we can figure that out, right? So in case of job set, that won't be a problem because job set controller shouldn't be setting this. Like shouldn't be enabling the workload integration for.
Well, no, because if a job set creates a job and job is actually automatically creating a gang, then you would have job set creating a gang and job creating a gang. And there's no, like, unless there's no API to disable it, you would have.
So I would say that it should be by default disabled, and there needs to be like explicit intent from the user when creating an object to enable, like job to enable the workload API. And like
I think the feature flag must be disabled, right?
It doesn't work that well.
Yep.
For feature flag, it would be fine, but the goal would be to remove that feature flag and turn it on by default everywhere.
So my expectation that's what, yeah. So like once the feature goes to beta and J, we just have a validation, right? To make sure, like we don't schedule job as a gank, right?
With that.
So the way I think about it is that like when we have a job set and like job set creates a workload, then the job it creates is actually kind of linked to the already existing workload. So like job controller is not creating workload if there is already a workload created by either like higher level controller or alternatively by the user or something. So like this, it's hand wavy. Like we need to like specify exactly what it means and how the checking works and how the links work here. But I think that's what we should try to achieve. If that makes sense to you, Kevin.
So in your case, you're saying, so when I create a job set, the controller would actually set the workload ref on the pod template, and
for the job.
And then job would just assume that the workload exists. I think that could work. And then for job, we would what I would like probably if you want gang scheduling is that when I create the job, it would probably create its own workload ref. And as long as we would just want to assume that the workload ref, if it's not defined, if it's defined already, then I'll skip the creation of the workload object.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we need details, but yes,
okay.
That's roughly the idea that I.
But overall, there is a way to make it work, especially in like I really like Wojtek's idea, right? To focus on one thing, like job, and only like have support for this in 136, which should be pretty straightforward, and then at least limited scope, right? As we said, like for example, we are not supporting any changes to parallelism. Basically, we'll need some validation for that too.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify here, Kevin and Andrea. You're saying that you will not be able to integrate with Workload API until we figure out a way for opt-out, or we will handle this inside the controller, which... Is this like a blocker? Is this like a blocker or not? This is my question.
I mean, I guess from Andre and I, when Anu was also the person that started looking at the job set.
Yeah, I was just typing.
Oh, nice.
Sorry. I was yeah, I have an older KEP for job set gang scheduling. It assumes the same thing that Wojciech just said, which is that the high level controller would set the workload references in the pod templates. And job, it assumes job would respect that and not create its own workload if one already exists or is provided by the user. But this is pretty old. I haven't updated it since the design discussion we've been having the last few weeks. So yeah, but I think I also have some examples of how the job set would integrate with the old pod group design at each level, like at the replica level, at the replicated job level, and just the job set level. So yeah, I'm happy to take feedback. Yeah, feel free to review.
Yeah, I can go ahead and close mine. I was more trying.
Oh, and yeah, I remember you also have one. Maybe it's useful to just link both and then take a look at both. I don't know. I don't know if yours is very different from what I had.
What was mine? No, they're very similar. I think I just based it off of the actual API that came out in 1.35. So like I have an implementation with it now. So that's the only difference really. But I guess the one difference Andre and we talked about was thinking about like for job set integration with DRA or topology aware scheduling. I don't like we were thinking like the concept of a workload template is probably what we would more want. Like be able to create stuff like depends on functionality for job set or the replicated jobs, like all the replicated jobs being a separate gang. And it really just depends on whatever the user is putting in their job set spec. Changes their gang scheduling heuristics.
In my cap, at least, regardless of the level at which they want to gang schedule, we only have one workload. So, like even if you're doing replicated level gangs, we're not going to have like a workload ref per replicated job. It's still going to be one workload for the whole object. And then, yeah, like the controls for how what level you do it at is controlled in a different way. It's in the cap. Yeah.
So from my understanding, the long-term goal for us is to still have one workload for actual true workload, right? This is why we designed the subgroup, spot sets, group, etc., right? Even for, complicated workflows, so, this disaggregated inference, right? There will be a one workload API. And with these spot groups and pod subgroups, we can build this, complexities around. I think for DRA, I mean, like we can eventually expose scheduling constraints as an API for the job set, for example, right? If you don't want to use template. Yeah, I'm like wondering, like, what level of, like, what actually we should expose to users, right? Because the array is kind of complex, right? For maybe job set user. I don't know if you need to simplify it in some sort of way, right? But it really depends, like, how the array scheduling constraints will be introduced in the workload API, right? Which is unclear from my understanding.
Okay, so again, sorry, I'm like just for the time, I'm sorry for that. So this won't be like a blocker, right? We can work around whatever we have right now to integrate with the Workload API without figuring out how to opt out from Workload API perspective. Is that right?
So I guess the question I have is, does it make sense for job set to build something with 1.35 alpha APIs, or should we just wait until 1.36 is out and then kind of support gang scheduling from 1.36 on? Because like Kubernetes is not going to provide any support for the alpha, and then we're also going to change the API. So then, and job set is like we ideally want it working across multiple Kubernetes versions. So I'm wondering, like, does it? Sorry, go on.
I'm okay to build like a proof of concept, but I don't think we would recommend it to users until it's beta in whatever version. But if it helps to validate the Workload API, yeah, I'm happy to do that work.
Yeah, I think like realistically, I think we should treat it as more as POC. Like no one reasonable will enable like alpha APIs in the production cluster. So like no one will effectively use that feature anyway when 35. So I think like we should treat it as more as a way to provide feedback back to the workload API. And I think that's effectively what is happening now exactly. Like your POCs, Kevin, and so on. It's exactly achieving that. But I think that the formal support on top of 135 is, I don't think it will really bring any value.
Okay, so
yeah,
again, this is totally okay, but are you blocking? Do you have any blockers for what we are going to have in 1.36 to just have like a POC, or maybe having a feature flag in job set and LWS for supporting gang scheduling using Workload API as alpha in these two sub projects?
I mean, I don't yet know what the changes exactly would be in 1.36, but
we already discussed this.
I know, but I don't. Yeah, the main issue, the pod group thing, I still have to reconcile myself around, like whether or not like job set, because like we could choose to create the pod group in alpha. Like there's no reason why we couldn't go forward with thinking about like the pod, like the instantiating the pod group objects in the workload controller. We don't have to do that for job, but for job set, maybe it makes sense to create the pod groups, but I still have to think through all the implications of what's going in 1.36.
Okay. So so it's not a blocker, but it's like work in progress. We don't know. Basically, we don't have answer for that.
I think I just want to say, I think again, the users in 1.36 say we're going to push the job changes. They can still use it within job set, right, Kevin? So it looks like for PyTorch jobs, it should be not a problem, right? Even for API, right? In a way, how we orchestrate API, I don't think it's a problem for them to use this gang scheduling with the two different replicated jobs. So it still should be fine. So from the adoption perspective, we don't need to expose anything. Like, like we can just say you should enable job, alpha feature, and you can use this within job set, right?
I don't think no, I don't think that would work, because if your leader and your worker are two separate gangs, they would be scheduled separately.
I think what I want to say, it is not a big deal. It's a big deal for API probably, but not for, what kind of jobs we're talking about. Yes, probably in JAX we do have coordinator, but for, for the majority of PyTorch, for example, runs, it doesn't really matter because they run only a single job. Like from the
if
use
that's
case,
the case, if we just wouldn't support multiple replicated jobs being gang scheduled together.
Yeah, exactly. And even for API, I mean, like, today how we bootstrap API, it's fine for workers to start separately from launcher. It just, it's how we run this today. The launcher fails multiple times, and then the API run just bootstrapping when everything is ready. But it's still like this gang scheduling of the individual replicated job still gives additional value for users from my perspective, compared to what we have today.
Okay, so this is a blocker for the multi-replicated. Is that the right name? Sorry. And the MPI, is that right?
Yeah, I think the block, yeah.
It's the same thing for leader worker set, effectively, like the pod subgroups and other stuff.
Okay.
Like,
yeah, but for other configuration for the job set, that's okay, right?
Yeah, so basically when a job set is a simple, we have only one maybe replicated job. It's like for simple PyTorch distributed training, it should work, right?
Okay. But other configuration, we can go with alpha integration or like POC with whatever we have right now in workload, right? Is that right?
Can we like specifically outline what will work and will not work for both set and LWS? I think that'll be helpful.
Exactly. This is what I'm trying to do right now for the job set and then for the LWS. For the job set,
basically, if we rely on alpha without pod subgroups, we are going to assume only a single replicated job will be gang scheduled. If there are multiple jobs,
so it's just the whole job set is scheduled, basically.
No, because if you have a job set with multiple replicated jobs, they would be just basically scheduled as separate gangs if we didn't have implementation with job set. I think it just depends on, like, we are not really blocked in the job set side on working with something. We just have to think through what happens if the job is orchestrating its own stuff and making sure that we don't step on each other's toes. It's kind of the main problem. Now,
we just don't set a workload reference in any of the pod objects. Is job gonna go override that?
We would have to set in order for the workload to work, we would have to set it. That probably would work fine. But it depends what I think Andre was saying with 1.36, we rely on the job integration, then that gets a little bit more confusing to me.
Okay.
Because in that case, the job controller would be setting its own, it would be setting the workload ref in the pod template and not the job set. And then that would be the job controller is controlling the gang scheduling and no longer the job set.
Okay, so we are running out of time. Like to summarize, so we have an agreement for job, right? Like to include it in 136 in a simple scope.
Yeah.
And for job set for LWA, like for job set, we believe we can support something like simple, like single replica.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me the thing is job set and leader worker set are.
It's not really, but like for those, like for LWS, I don't think we can support that now. But like we will have Kevin, like Andre, look into that.
Exactly.
Well, we are not. I'm sorry, I'm not a member. All I'm trying to say is the timeline for job set and leader worker set for 1.36 is 2 or 3 months away from now, and not right now because they're not in history.
Yeah.
So I think we can figure that one out separately.
So yeah, okay. I think this sounds good for now. About the DRA, are we going to add a new field for resource claim templates in pod group or not?
Do we want to, like, my feeling is that we should postpone it to 137, not because it's a not important feature, but it's because like I think we need to focus on building the foundations first, and like I'm afraid that we will not be able to do everything.
Yeah.
But it's my opinion. I mean, feel free anyone to challenge that.
It's basically you and Eric and Matt who will decide this, because it's for me we can go with alpha for resource claim templates in pod group level. So we're not at least we can explore the integration with DRA in 1.36, and we're not getting late and like postpone it to 1.37 and start from 1.37, but it's up to you.
Yeah, but like if we have cycles, I'm fine if we open cap and like discuss it there. As you said, like we can end up filled in alpha, and that's fine. But yeah, like.
Yeah, I mean, like we should absolutely continue discussing that. Like that I'm like 100% convinced. Like I'm just a little bit skeptical that we will be able to figure it out. And I don't want to couple that discussion with all the other proposals.
Yeah.
Right. I think from the implementation point of view, that would be very challenging to sync it with everything that we do. We should like make sure that the highest priority work is done correctly.
Okay.
And sorry, are we doing the same thing with Taz?
This is something different. Taz is another work stream that we're not discussing in this scope.
But Taz is actually something that we would like to have in 136.
In alpha, yes.
Okay. So Taz, we will have like in pod group level or workload level?
Workload. So I can send you a cap that is right now.
But again, here, like the primary goal is to have some initial version of the algorithm itself, and like the exposure to users will come later. So like we start again like with the foundation, and we'll build on top of that.
Yeah, this was my hope for the DRA as well, but totally I understand we don't have time. But because we have John who's working on like this integration, I was hoping that since we have like extra resource, he can help us figuring this integration, so we can push this to 1.36. But totally up to you, of course.
Yeah, that's something to discuss like next week, next meeting, or so.
Okay.
We should be discussing this because those are important. But yeah, let's focus on delivering things that we can.
Perfect. Okay. I think we.
It's just quickly on the round preemption the same, right? So like
delayed preemption.
Yes.
That's part of the like graduation criteria for 136 beta. So we will have that
for TAS, right?
Like it's actually independent from TAS, right?
Yeah.
So preemption is another topic, right? We do have from tier 8 TAS and gang scheduling.
Wojtek, do you want to add like more?
I think that the delayed preemption, we are making it effectively part of gang scheduling, because like we don't want to make preemptions if in the end we will not be able to schedule a gang. So that is kind of bundled with gang scheduling. And there is another thing that is workload-aware preemption that is a separate thing. So preempt, like trying to preempt, making it able to define like a preemption unit that is not an individual pod but a pod group. Well, eventually probably more, but like in the first step, the preemption unit can be a pod group.
So we expect the workload API, whatever we have right now, except the renaming will be on beta. The new fields for TAS, for preemptions will be in alpha, and the new runtime pod group API would be in alpha as well. And the job API will integrate with whatever we have in 1.36 with the workload API and the pod group as well. Does this seems okay?
Yes, that seems perfect. So
okay, Matt, Eric.
And sorry, the last thing, we're at time. For Elastic jobs, are we just going to go forward with job and other stuff of not supporting those for gangs going for the original support for this? Because that was the other. I know there's a lot of discussion about
136. Yes, we will need some validation to basically prohibit any changes to parallels when gang scheduling is enabled. And in 137, we'll aim to make the min count mutable, which will open door for like properly supporting.
I think we should talk about it more. I mean, I think we have a way to make it without mutable min counts, as we discussed in the comments.
Let's discuss, but like
we can continue in the doc. Yeah.
Okay, but so I'm just wondering for like for 1.36 with beta, we will just forbid modifying parallelism and when gang
scheduling. Yeah.
Okay.
But that would mean that if we want to opt in always, then we effectively forbid it. Like we would have to have a way to opt out of gang scheduling in certain cases.
Yes, we'll need that.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you all. I think next meeting we have sig-scheduling, but like it is tomorrow, so I don't think if we will have time for new updates. Hopefully, if we have, we will add it to the agenda. But otherwise, we will have another meeting on Monday. Hopefully, we will have the two caps for the graduation and for the pod group ready for discussion, and the job API as well. The job API cap. Does this sound okay for everyone? Amazing. Thank you all. Thank you so much. This was productive meeting. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yep.
Yeah. See you. Bye.